We are discussing home microbiome tests, or like stool sample tests, poop tests. It is becoming increasingly popular to have at-home tests. There are some positives, there are some concerns, and I just want to have this conversation because it comes up quite often. It's coming up more and more in conversation with people. These kits promise a convenient way to assess your health, but are they really helpful? How reliable are they? Let's dive into some of the limitations, some considerations. This is not all pro or against. Let's just have a chat about it. If all that sounds good to you, let's go. Hi folks, welcome to my channel, or welcome back. My name is Kat. I'm a licensed registered dietitian nutritionist, and on this channel we like to talk about weight inclusive and weight neutral focused approaches to health, as well as diving into scammy and, in my opinion, unethical nutrition related businesses, products, mostly nutrition related MLMs, and other fear mongering nutrition related claims. Alright, so let's talk about what stool samples are, or poop samples. Essentially, bowel movements or stools, they are closely linked to digestive health. We can tell a lot, not everything about what's going on digestive wise, but we can tell a good amount of information. It's part of the gathering process of kind of figuring out what's going on if somebody is having concerns or issues regarding their digestive system. Now, stool samples are often used by gastroenterologists in lab settings. They can look into specific digestive related conditions, or somebody has like actual parasites, like legitimate, not talking boo related parasites here, but like if they have been traveling a lot. I have seen people with actual parasites. There's a lot of misinformation and fear mongering around parasites and saying like everybody has them. That is not the case, but there are actual cases where parasites can be found. So they can test for things like that. They can also test for different kind of infections going on. It can help with monitoring gastrointestinal diseases. So there's a lot of things that we can learn about stool samples and bowel movements in general. Some doctors will use that in addition to other things to test for certain conditions. Stool samples can help with analyzing certain markers of bacteria. So in trying to see if there are any like imbalances going on within the microbiome. We have so many bacteria, helpful bacteria, even ones that aren't so helpful, but maybe not causing too much harm or causing harm, but just kind of seeing what that balance looks like or imbalance looks like. And there's other things that are tested within stool samples, not necessarily just like the bacteria, or even markers to give us more information on like enzymes. There's a lot that can be seen from microbiome tests from laboratory settings. In general, and I'm talking about at-home stool sample tests and also in a professional or clinical setting, while these tests can provide insights into digestive health, it is essential for them to be accurately read or accurately interpreted. And that is done within the context of other things in the health assessment. Interpretation of tests, that is so crucial. And that's really one of the concerns when we start to talk about at-home tests. So let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits of home testing. We'll be discussing some of the limitations, but I think it's important to talk about some of the benefits as well. Now, one of the major benefits is convenience. Sometimes people can't really get to a clinic for some reason, like physically or just like time-wise, if they're taking care of a lot of little ones maybe, and they're stay at home, and by the time they are able to get childcare, maybe the doctor's offices are closed, and it's just hard kind of making plans around that. There are so many other reasons why, where convenience really plays a role. Privacy is another benefit, especially for some people. Some people may feel very uncomfortable providing a stool sample, and so this offers kind of a more discreet way of sending that in. Additionally, a lot of the tests out there are pretty user-friendly when it comes to like at-home testing kits. The instructions are pretty clear. Collection and submission is pretty straightforward. Not to say that there can't be some issues with that, but they try to make it pretty simple. Now, these tests should not replace professional medical advice, but they can be part of a larger conversation and maybe a prompt for getting somebody to seek healthcare for an issue that they've been experiencing that they're maybe wanting to find answers for. And so that can like prompt them into working with a healthcare provider to receive appropriate evaluation and care. Now, this can be helpful, especially if there is an abnormal result and if it encourages more timely medical intervention that might not have happened without that. But let's talk about some of the shortcomings or some of the concerns around these kind of at-home stool sample kits. There are notable limitations in these, unfortunately. There's a wide variety as far as accuracy and reliability that these tests can provide. There have been companies who have been shut down and sued and gotten in trouble for having stool sample tests that were just not reliable at all and were making like excessive claims around them. Just as any other part of the healthcare and wellness industries, we see scams in this area as well. Depending on the laboratory equipment and the staffing of professionals who are running these tests, like that plays a role in the accuracy and the reliability of the results. Environmental factors like temperature and humidity that might alter some of the results as well, versus if somebody were to provide that stool sample to a clinic and have more like controlled atmosphere around there. Any deviation as far as like size or like timing or handling, any deviation from the instructions, that can cause more issues with reliability and validity. So like user error is a risk, maybe even from misinterpreting the instructions provided. But then that also leads to maybe skewed results that can cause further questions and just confusion around what the actual results are. Another significant limitation of at-home stool sample tests is the interpretation piece of things. Now, these tests provide, depending on the kind that is done, can provide a lot of information, and this can lead to more questions than answers because the field of digestive health, when it comes to understanding microbiome and stool samples, there's a lot that is known, but there's also a lot that is unknown. And what is known and interpreted is always interpreted with more information. It's not like a standalone kind of thing typically. We're going to be looking at other information before interpreting or as interpreting happens. For instance, the presence of a certain bacteria, that might not necessarily indicate a problem. Yes, there are some less helpful, sorry, there's a cat hair flying around. There are some less helpful bacteria, but if it is not in an amount that is causing any issues and there is something else that is causing those issues, the focus or the plan of action might be focused too much on that, missing something else that is important to be taken care of. Without more detailed understanding of the nuances that surround digestive health and microbiome, it is really easy to misinterpret those results. And that misinterpretation can potentially lead to some health anxiety or some more like fear around what's going on that's not actually really happening, or could miss certain things that should be looked into further. And there are certain findings within those that require additional kind of follow-up by a health professional. Like some markers are indicative of more serious health conditions. And so the interpretation piece is so important, and that can sometimes be missed when we're doing at-home stool sample tests. Essentially, the gap there can lead to either complacency or undue anxiety. You might overlook a serious condition thinking that, it's not a big deal, or on the flip side, you might overly be concerned about something that is completely normal. And maybe you do have digestive health symptoms and stuff, but it's from something else going on. Like there can be normal, healthy variation in digestive health bacteria. And there is no like standard when it comes to all of the markers that are being tested for. And so if somebody does get a test and it's missing certain markers that would be really important or helpful to have, they might miss those specific tests. And the handling overall, that can lead to false positives or false negatives, further complicating the diagnostic process. Now, it is important to note that stool sample tests are not used as like the only test that's going on. Like they're not a standalone information tool. They should be viewed as a step of a wider kind of picture of what is going on. And that is done through the supervision of a health professional. Now, another consideration to think about for these home tests is that there is a lack of regulatory oversight. These tests can face different kind of regulations versus the ones that are being used by actual clinics, because we have these kind of like startup companies versus like clinics that have access to actual like quality, high quality labs. And those have very stringent validation tools and quality control measures in place. Whereas at home stool samples, there's not really that regulatory oversight. Now, this is where like the differences in what is being tested, how it's developed overall, how it's marketed, like that can be very different because of those differences. The regulatory oversight. So like while the at-home tests provide a lot of convenience for people, it doesn't necessarily provide that same level of certainty as a test that is conducted in a controlled clinical environment. Now, we already talked about some of the kind of anxiety that might come from the results, but I think that is a really significant concern that needs to be considered. That can lead people into thinking or believing that they are in good health when maybe there does need to be some additional tests that need to go on. That itself can delay the seeking of professional medical advice and potentially worsen the conditions going on. On the flip side, there is that unnecessary harm that can put more burden on the healthcare system with like further invasive testing and treatments that aren't necessarily like needed if it was like false results. Burden on the individual and also the healthcare system. So I think it's just important to approach these at-home tests, if somebody is doing them, to approach with some caution and to follow up with, if you can, follow up with a healthcare professional just to like confirm any findings and to do a more thorough kind of evaluation. Now, I understand there is intense privilege surrounding that. Not everybody has access, and people might be doing those at-home stool sample tests because they don't have access to that kind of help or support. And this is why I'm not fully against at-home stool sample tests, and I'll talk about when I think they might be helpful, but I'm not 100% for or against them. It is a very nuanced topic, and it is nuanced because of things like the social determinants of health and the access that various people have. The access and support, availability, accessibility, like so much. It's a huge conversation. Now, I'm going to put a link to an article. It was from a microbiologist, and he did kind of his own kind of testing. He did multiple different stool samples, and what he found was that the results were they were everywhere. The information was all over the place. Some of them didn't detect the same information or like detect the same microbes. So it really highlighted that this is an area that is really interesting and intriguing for a lot of people, myself included, but it's just not at a place right now where we can really feel confident in recommending someone to do this. That doesn't mean that that won't be the case in, however many years. Could be very close. It might be coming up. Like, science can move really quickly, so it might not be much longer. But right now, that is not the case. The science surrounding it is still developing. And the fact that our microbiome can change pretty quickly, like relatively quickly, that can also play a role in like the interpretation and the accuracy of the results. Now, if somebody is wanting to do an at-home stool sample, so when I'm working with someone, that is not the first thing that I will do. For most people, I work with a lot of people in digestive health, and the vast majority, we never have to do additional kind of testing, stool sample testing, or they'll get something done by their gastroenterologist. Occasionally, someone does really want to do one, and if that's the case, then we would typically do something like the GI map. In the field of at-home stool sample test, that is one of the better ones that I have found, but it still has limitations and it should not be used in isolation. There was a study, I think it was either published it's in PubMed, it was either in 2021 or it was somewhat recently, and they found that it had a sensitivity of 80% but a low specificity of 26%, so that can indicate a higher rate of false positives, and so definitely not to be taken in isolation. And it's not one of the first things. There are so many things that we can do beforehand, before doing a stool sample, that can be evidence-based and really helpful and beneficial. This is more for if people have done various tests already and been cleared by their gastroenterologist, maybe they've done colonoscopies, endoscopies, they have just been given the diagnosis of IBS and not really helped after that. And it's kind of one of those let's kind of try it because that is part of evidence-based care. Evidence-based care actually has 3 pillars. The first pillar is evidence-based information, research, what is validated, like what we know. The second pillar is clinical expertise, and that's where sometimes like we don't know and we don't have everything when it comes to information, like for like research. And so that's where that clinical expertise can come into play. And then there's also patient values and preferences. And so evidence-based care is the conglomerate of those 3 pillars. And so that's where sometimes like where the GI map can come into play. But again, it's not to be used in isolation, and it needs to be interpreted by a health professional. In conclusion, the at-home microbiome testing, it has definitely some criticism. It's under scrutiny for its effectiveness and also for ethical business practices, because there have been so many that have been shut down because of bad practice. The promise of these kind of tests can lead to more confusion and more just frustration about the situation. Now, a lot of people do have questions or fascination about the diversity of our microbiome. And one of the best kind of advice pieces that I can provide is to get as much of a variety of plant foods as possible. So there's a study about how people who generally have more than 30 different kind of plant intake variety wise in a week typically also have a wider microbiome. And it makes sense because the microbiome is going to be feeding off of the prebiotics or off of the fibers, the kind of plants. And it's not just talking about like fruits and vegetables. I'm talking about nuts and seeds and legumes, grains as well. And so I'll also put up kind of a download about this that I think can be helpful for some people if that is their goal of diversifying overall microbiome. But that's one of the best ways if somebody did want to focus on digestive health. That is one way. Now there are certain kind of carbohydrate chains that when consumed, if there is an imbalance in microbiome, that can actually cause more gas and bloating and changes in bowel movements. And it's not the actual carbohydrate that's the issue, it's the microbiome that's the issue. And so that's why sometimes people might go on like a carnivore diet or a very, very, very low carb diet and start to feel better. Well, it's because they're not getting those kind of carbohydrate intake wise that is going to kind of make that imbalance cause those kind of symptoms. But that doesn't fix the actual problem. In fact, that can make the problem that much more of a problem. I have worked with people, they went on like a keto diet, but it was just not sustainable. And so they started to increase more of the carbohydrates. And then all of a sudden they started having digestive health issues. And that's because that significant reduction in carbohydrates did cause an imbalance microbiome wise. And so that is kind of just something that we have to slowly work on increasing and have a plan of action for that to address that issue specifically. So it's not like a one size fits all kind of thing, but generally if you can tolerate different kinds of fibers and carbohydrates, then check out that download that I'll have linked. That wraps it up for today's video. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, it's not a black or white kind of conversation. There is just so much nuance when it comes to these kind of stool samples, at-home stool sample kits. If you like this video, please leave a like. Make sure you're subscribed. If you aren't, I'd really appreciate that. And remember, you can strive for health without subscribing to diet culture. I'll see you later. Bye.